I took back my daughter's college fund after she said she's going no contact. Okay, so here's the deal. I'm a single mom, 45F, with two kids, Ella, 18F, and Jake, 16M. Life hasn't exactly been a walk in the park for us, especially after my husband passed away when the kids were really young. I mean, I'm talking about when they were barely old enough to understand what was going on. So, yeah, it's just been me for the last 12 years holding everything together. I think it's important to mention up front that when my husband passed, he left behind a life insurance policy. I guess that was his way of making sure we were going to be okay, you know? And I don't want to sound ungrateful or anything. It definitely helped. But the truth is, money doesn't last forever, and life doesn't get cheaper just because you have a little cushion in the bank. I had to be smart about it. The first thing I did was make sure the basic stuff was covered. House payments, groceries, bills, just the usual stuff that you've got to deal with. But what really kept me awake at night was making sure that my kids wouldn't be stuck in a financial hole when they grew up, especially with how expensive college is nowadays. And since Ella had always been super into school, I knew college was definitely going to be in her future. So I made a decision early on to set aside part of that life insurance money into a college fund for both Ella and Jake. The goal was simple. I didn't want them drowning in debt after school. That college fund became the center of everything I did. It's not like we lived a glamorous life, but I made sure the bills were paid, food was on the table, and the rest of the money went into that fund. There were no extravagant vacations, no big purchases, and honestly, I barely bought anything for myself. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't like I was miserable or anything. I just had my priorities straight. It was all about making sure my kids were going to have a solid future. Ella, from a young age, was always talking about getting into one of those prestigious colleges. You know, the kind you see in movies, where everyone's got perfect dorm rooms, and they walk around campus with books under their arms, looking all smart. She was obsessed with the idea, and I honestly couldn't have been prouder of her for dreaming big. I mean, I wanted that for her. I wanted her to go somewhere that would open doors and give her the kind of opportunities I never had growing up. And we talked about it a lot. Over the years, we had countless conversations about college and the importance of education. She knew the sacrifices I was making, and I always made sure she understood that the money I was saving was specifically for her and Jake's future. I didn't want there to be any misunderstandings. The college fund was off limits for anything else. Now, I'll be the first to admit, things weren't always perfect between me and Ella. I mean, what mother-daughter relationship is, right? She's a teenager, and with that comes the usual drama. But for the most part, we got along fine. And I always thought we had a pretty close bond. We'd have our arguments here and there, like any family does. But nothing ever felt like it was tearing us apart. But I guess looking back now, I should have paid more attention to the little changes. It's easy to ignore things when you're just trying to keep the day-to-day going. You get caught up in work, making sure the house isn't falling apart, and just managing life in general. But when I think about it now, I can see there were some red flags I probably should have noticed earlier. Ella started hanging out with a different crowd during her last year of high school. Nothing too wild, but just different from the friends she used to have. I didn't think much of it at first. Kids grow up and their interests change, right? But I could see that she was starting to pull away from me a little. She wasn't as open with me as she used to be. We weren't having those long talks like we used to, where we'd sit in the kitchen and she'd tell me about her day or her plans or whatever was on her mind. Those moments just kind of stopped. And then there was her attitude. Now, I don't want to sound like I'm complaining about normal teenage stuff because I get it. Teenagers are moody. But Ella started saying things that really hurt. She'd snap at me over small things like asking her to clean her room or help with dinner, saying that I was smothering her or treating her like a baby. It stung, but I figured it was just a phase and that she'd come around eventually. I mean, we all go through that, don't we? Still, it was hard not to notice that she was pulling further and further away, and I couldn't help but feel like there was something else going on. It wasn't just normal teenage rebellion. It felt bigger, like there was something she wasn't telling me, and I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. Then she started dating Matt. That's when things really started to shift. I had met him a couple of times, and he seemed okay on the surface. Polite enough, didn't seem like trouble or anything. But after they started spending more time together, Ella changed. She wasn't just moody or distant anymore. She was flat out cold. She'd go from ignoring me to snapping at me for the smallest things. It felt like I couldn't do anything right, no matter how hard I tried. Every time I brought up college or her future, she'd shut the conversation down and say I was stressing her out. It was so out of character for her. I started to feel like I didn't even know my own daughter anymore. I wanted to ask her if something was wrong, if there was something going on between her and Matt, but I was scared of pushing her further away. It's a fine line to walk when your kid's growing up. You want to be involved, but not overbearing. And to be honest, I didn't want to believe that things were getting that bad. I thought it was just a rough patch we'd get through eventually. But deep down, I was worried. The more distant she got, the more I started questioning myself. Had I done something wrong? Had I missed something important along the way? I've always tried my best as a mom, but seeing her slip away like that, it made me feel helpless. And all this time, that college fund was still sitting there, untouched, waiting for her. I never imagined that the very thing I worked so hard to build for her would end up being a point of tension between us. But it's funny how life works sometimes. Just when you think you've got everything figured out, things take a turn you never saw coming. So things really started shifting when Ella began dating Matt. I'll admit, at first, I didn't think too much of it. He seemed like a regular guy, a bit older than Ella, but nothing that raised any major red flags at the time. I met him a couple of times when he'd come over for dinner or just hang out at our place. He was polite, said all the right things, and I figured if Ella liked him, then he must be a decent guy. I mean, she's smart, right? She's always had good judgment, so I trusted her on that. But man, after a few weeks of them dating, everything just changed. I noticed it slowly at first. Like she'd start staying out later than usual and wouldn't tell me where she was going. If I asked, she'd either brush me off or give me this annoyed look, like I was being unreasonable for even asking. And I get it. She's 18, almost an adult. But I don't think it's crazy to want to know where your kid is, you know? It wasn't just her being out late, though. It was her whole attitude. She became distant, like she didn't want to talk to me anymore. Before Matt came into the picture, we used to have these talks in the kitchen, about school, about her future, just regular stuff. But those moments got fewer and fewer, and when I tried to bring it up, she'd get defensive. She'd say things like, "Mom, you're suffocating me," or "You treat me like I'm still a little kid." That one hurt, honestly, because I thought I was giving her enough space. One night, we had a small argument over something trivial, like, I think I asked her to help out with the dishes or something, and she just exploded. Out of nowhere, she started going off about how I'm always on her case, how I never let her do anything, how I treat her like a baby. She even accused me of trying to control her life, which is so far from the truth. All I've ever tried to do was make sure she had the best possible future. That's when I started getting worried about Matt. I didn't know if he was saying things to her or if she was just influenced by him in some way, but it felt like her entire personality was shifting the longer she spent with him. Like this wasn't the Ella I knew, the Ella I raised, and I had no idea how to get through to her because every time I tried, it turned into another fight. And the thing is, I wasn't just imagining this stuff. Even Jake noticed it. He's a pretty quiet kid, but one day he came to me and said, "Mom, what's going on with Ella? She's always so mad now." That broke my heart because if Jake, who barely says a word most of the time, could see it, then I knew I wasn't overreacting. Something was definitely up. The more time Ella spent with Matt, the worse things got at home. She'd disappear for entire weekends and barely text me back when I'd check in. I tried to talk to her about it, but it always ended the same way, with her telling me I was being too controlling or treating her like a kid. I didn't even know how to respond anymore. I didn't want to push her further away, but I couldn't just sit there and let her slip out of my life like that either. I started to wonder if Matt was really the problem, or if it was just part of her growing up and me having a hard time letting go. You know those late-night thoughts when you're lying in bed, trying to make sense of things? But deep down, I knew it wasn't just about her growing up. This wasn't the natural teenage rebellion everyone talks about. This felt different. There was this tension between us that hadn't been there before. I even tried to be nice to Matt, thinking maybe if I made an effort with him, things between me and Ella would get better. I invited him over for dinner a few more times, tried to engage him in conversation, but he was always kind of distant. He'd answer my questions, but he never really tried to get to know me. It was like he was just there to be with Ella and didn't care about building a relationship with me or Jake. And honestly, the more I saw them together, the more uneasy I felt about their relationship. There was something about the way he seemed to have this influence over her. It was subtle, but it was there. It wasn't just that Ella was being rude to me either. She stopped caring about her future too. All those dreams she had of going to a good college, getting a degree. Suddenly, none of that seemed to matter to her anymore. Anytime I brought it up, she'd roll her eyes and say things like, "I'll figure it out, Mom," or "Stop stressing me out about it." I started feeling like I was the only one who still cared about her future, and that scared me. College was always the plan. It's what we talked about for years. How could she just suddenly not care? One night, I decided to sit her down for a serious talk. I didn't want to fight with her. I just wanted to understand what was going on in her head. I asked her about college, about Matt, about why she'd been acting so distant. And I swear, the look on her face, it was like I was a stranger to her. She didn't say much, just kept repeating that I was overreacting, that everything was fine, and that I needed to stop worrying so much. But I couldn't stop worrying. I mean, how could I? This was my daughter, the same kid who used to talk about her dream school and all the things she wanted to achieve. And now, it was like she didn't even care anymore. I couldn't just sit back and watch her throw all that away without trying to help. So I asked her, straight up, if Matt had something to do with this change. If he was saying things that made her pull away from me. If he was influencing her decisions. And that's when she completely blew up. I'd never seen her so angry before. She accused me of not trusting her, of trying to control her relationship, and said that Matt had nothing to do with it, that it was all me, that I was the problem. I didn't know what to say. It's one thing to have your kid be mad at you, but it's another thing to hear them say that you are the reason everything's falling apart. I felt like I was losing her, and no matter what I said or did, it just pushed her further away. At that point, I knew something had to give. I couldn't keep pretending like everything was fine when clearly it wasn't. But I didn't know how to fix it, and I didn't know how to get Ella back. It felt like the more I tried, the worse things got. And Matt? He was always there in the background, watching it all happen. I couldn't shake the feeling that he had more to do with this than Ella was willing to admit. But how do you say that without pushing your kid away for good? It felt like I was walking on eggshells every time I tried to talk to her. And I was terrified that one wrong step would make everything fall apart even more. So the breaking point came during what I thought was going to be just another regular argument. We'd been having more and more of those lately, with Ella constantly pushing back against everything I said. And I get it. She's 18, she's almost an adult, and she wants her independence. But the way she'd been acting, it was like I didn't even recognize her anymore. I knew things were tense between us, but I never expected what came next. It started over something small, like most of our arguments had been lately. I think I asked her if she had thought about her college applications, and it just set her off. She snapped at me, telling me to stop stressing her out and that she had everything under control. I remember feeling this frustration bubbling up inside me because honestly, nothing seemed under control. She wasn't talking about college like she used to. She wasn't talking to me at all, really, so I pushed a little harder, probably more than I should have, and that's when it happened. She looked me dead in the eyes and said, "I'm done with you, Mom. When I leave for college, I'm going no contact. I don't need you anymore." I don't think I'll ever forget that moment. It felt like my heart just stopped, like someone had knocked the air out of me. I couldn't even respond right away because I was so shocked. I mean, after everything I had done for her, everything I had sacrificed, this was what she thought of me? That she could just cut me out of her life as soon as she was old enough to leave? I must have looked stunned because she kept going. "You've been controlling my whole life," she said. "Once I'm gone, I'm not coming back. I don't want anything to do with you." That's when I lost it. All the years of holding back, trying to be the best mom I could be, making sacrifices, working late nights, all of it came rushing to the surface. I started listing everything I had done for her, telling her how much I had given up just to make sure she and Jake had a good life. I reminded her about the college fund, how I had saved every extra penny from her dad's life insurance to make sure she could go to the best school without being buried in debt. But she just stood there, arms crossed, with this look on her face like she didn't care, like none of it mattered. And honestly, that hurt more than anything she'd said so far. It was like she had completely shut off her emotions, and I couldn't get through to her at all. "I didn't ask you to do that," she finally said. "You keep throwing it in my face like I owe you something. I don't. I never asked for any of it." Hearing her say that was like a slap in the face. It made me realize just how far we'd drifted apart. I thought she understood, that we were on the same page about her future and how much I was doing to make sure she could have it. But clearly, I had been wrong. She didn't see it that way at all. To her, I was just this overbearing, controlling parent who was suffocating her with expectations. I tried to stay calm, but I could feel myself getting more and more upset. "Ella, I've done everything I could to give you the life you wanted," I said. "And this is how you repay me? By saying you're cutting me out of your life as soon as you don't need me anymore? That's not fair." She didn't even flinch. "I'm not a little girl anymore, Mom," she shot back. "I don't need you. I'll be fine on my own." That's when I realized that no matter what I said, it wasn't going to make a difference. Ella had made up her mind, and nothing I could do or say was going to change that. I was angry, sure, but more than that, I was heartbroken. I had spent 18 years building a life for her and her brother, making sure they had everything they needed, And now she was telling me that none of it mattered. And it wasn't just about the money or the sacrifices I made. It was about the fact that she was ready to walk away from me entirely, like I was just some obstacle in her path. She wasn't even considering how much it would hurt me, how much it would hurt her brother to lose her. It was all about her, and that was the part I couldn't wrap my head around. After a few moments of silence, I asked her, "So what happens to Jake? Are you going no contact with him too? Or is it just me you're done with?" She rolled her eyes like the question was ridiculous. "Of course not," she said. "I'll still talk to Jake. But you? I need space from you, Mom. I need to live my own life." I couldn't believe it. She was ready to completely shut me out, but she'd still keep in touch with Jake? It didn't make any sense to me. I had been there for both of them since day one, and now she was acting like I was the enemy, like I was some roadblock she had to get past. I knew I had to leave the conversation before it got even worse. So I just said, "If that's really what you want, Ella, then I can't stop you. But I want you to really think about what you're saying before you make any decisions you can't take back." She just shrugged and walked away like it was no big deal. Like she hadn't just dropped a bomb on me. I remember standing there in the kitchen staring after her, feeling like my whole world had just been flipped upside down. How did we get here? How did my relationship with my own daughter get to the point where she wanted to cut me out of her life? I couldn't sleep that night. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, trying to figure out where I had gone wrong. Was I really being too controlling? Had I smothered her without realizing it? Or was this just Matt's influence, making her see me as the bad guy? The next few days were awkward. Ella didn't say much, and I didn't know what to say to her either. There was this tension hanging over the house, and every time I saw her, I felt that pit in my stomach. I wanted to talk to her to try to fix things, but I didn't know how. It was like there was this wall between us now, and I had no idea how to break it down. Jake could tell something was off too. He asked me once, "Mom, is everything okay with Ella?" And I just told him it was fine because I didn't want to drag him into it. But deep down, I knew it wasn't fine. It wasn't fine at all. I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was falling apart, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. So after Ella dropped that whole no contact thing on me, I spent a few days just kind of lost, honestly. I didn't know what to do. I mean, how do you respond when your own kid tells you they don't want you in their life anymore? It's not like there's a manual for this kind of thing. I kept thinking back to our conversation, replaying it in my head over and over, trying to figure out if there was something I missed. Maybe I had been too controlling. Maybe I had pushed her too hard, but I just didn't see how wanting the best for her made me the bad guy. The silence in the house was unbearable. Ella and I were barely talking, and the few times we did talk, it was all short answers and eye rolls. The tension was so thick, you could practically cut it with a knife. Jake was starting to notice too, but he kept his head down like he didn't want to get caught in the middle of it. Smart kid. Then came the night when everything really blew up. I wasn't planning on confronting her again, not so soon after the last argument, but sometimes things just happen when you're not ready for them. Ella had come home late, again, and I asked her where she'd been. I didn't mean to start anything, I was just genuinely curious. But of course, it escalated. She gave me the same attitude she'd been giving me for weeks. "Why do you always need to know where I am? I'm not a kid anymore, Mom. Stop treating me like one." Now I know I should have probably just let it go, but it was late, and I was tired, and honestly I was done tiptoeing around her like I had been these last few days. I snapped back, "Because I'm still your mom, Ella, and I care about you. Is that such a bad thing?" And that's when it all came pouring out. She turned to me, eyes filled with frustration, and said, "You're not caring. You're controlling. You've been controlling me my whole life. Everything's always been about what you want for me, never about what I want." That hit me hard. I'd always thought I was doing what was best for her, giving her a stable future, making sure she had everything she needed to succeed. But hearing her say that, it was like she saw all my efforts as some kind of leash, like I was holding her back instead of lifting her up. I didn't know what to say. I was caught between wanting to defend myself and not wanting to push her further away. "You act like I haven't given up so much for you and Jake," I said, my voice shaking a little. "Everything I've done has been for you. I've worked my whole life to make sure you didn't have to struggle. I saved that college fund so you could go to the school of your dreams, Ella, and now you're saying it doesn't matter?" "Exactly," she shot back. "You did all of that, but not because I asked you to. You keep using the college fund as if it's some kind of bargaining chip to control what I do. I never wanted to be in debt to you like that." "In debt?" I could hardly believe what I was hearing. "This isn't about debt. It's about giving you the chance to succeed without being buried in loans. How could you think that? Ella shook her head, her arms crossed tight over her chest like she was trying to keep herself from exploding. You don't get it, do you? You've made everything about you. The money, the plans, all of it. I never had a say in anything. And now you're surprised I don't want to be a part of it anymore? That was the moment I realized just how different we were seeing things. To me, everything I had done had been out of love, out of a desire to protect her and make sure she had the opportunities I didn't. But to her, it was control. Every sacrifice I made, every late night working extra hours, it wasn't seen as love. It was seen as a cage. And as much as it hurt to hear her say that, I had to face the reality that, somewhere along the way, we had stopped understanding each other. Ella, all I've ever wanted was for you to have the life you dreamed of, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. How did it get to this? Why do you feel like I'm the enemy here? She let out a frustrated sigh. Because you never listened to me. Every time I try to make my own decisions, you're right there, telling me what I should do, what's best for me. You never even asked what I wanted. I didn't know what to say. I felt like I was sinking in quicksand, and every word I said just pulled me deeper. Maybe she was right. Maybe I hadn't listened as much as I thought I had. I always assumed I knew what was best because I was her mom and I'd lived through it. I thought that was my job, to guide her, to keep her on track. But maybe I'd been holding on too tightly without even realizing it. So what do you want then, Ella? I asked, feeling a lump in my throat. If you could have it your way, what would that look like? Her answer came fast, almost like she'd been waiting for me to ask. I just want to live my own life without you hovering over me. I want to make my own choices, even if they're mistakes. And I don't want you holding the college fund over my head like it's some reward for being the daughter you want me to be. That's when it hit me that, in her eyes, the college fund wasn't a gift. It was a weight. Something she felt like she had to earn instead of something that was there because I loved her. And that realization crushed me. I never meant for it to feel that way, I said quietly. The college fund, everything I've done, it was never about control. It was because I love you and I wanted to give you a good life. I know you love me, Mom, she said, her voice softening just a little. But I need you to let go. I need to live my life for me, not for you. There was a long silence after that. I didn't know what to say. I felt like I was standing at a crossroads, and no matter which way I turned, I was going to lose something. If I let her go, if I stopped pushing her toward the future I'd envisioned for her, was I letting her down? But if I kept holding on, I'd push her even further away. It was a no-win situation. I don't want to lose you, I finally said, my voice breaking, but I don't know how to just let go. Ella sighed, her arms dropping to her sides. You won't lose me, Mom, but I need space, and I need you to trust me. I nodded, but deep down I wasn't sure if I could trust her judgment. How could I, when every instinct I had told me she was making the wrong decisions? But maybe that was the point. Maybe she needed to make her own mistakes. And maybe I needed to learn how to step back, even if it scared the hell out of me. That night, after Ella went to bed, I sat in the kitchen for a long time, thinking about everything. About how hard I had tried to give her the best life possible, and how it had somehow turned into something that pushed her away. And I realized that maybe, just maybe, loving someone meant letting them find their own way, even if you don't agree with the path they're taking. But one thing was clear. I wasn't ready to give up on her. Not yet. So after that conversation with Ella, I spent a lot of time thinking about everything she said, about how I'd been holding on too tight, about how she felt like I wasn't giving her any control over her own life. It wasn't easy to hear, but deep down, I knew there was some truth in what she said. I've always been the kind of mom who's involved in every little detail, making sure things are going smoothly, making sure the kids are on the right track. I never thought of it as being controlling. I just wanted to help her avoid the mistakes I made when I was younger. But after that night, I had to face reality. Ella didn't want my help anymore. She didn't want my guidance. She wanted space. She wanted freedom. And she wanted to do things her way. And honestly, that scared the hell out of me. I'd spent years saving up that college fund for her, putting away money from her dad's life insurance, and working extra hours so she could go to a good school without worrying about debt. But now she was telling me she didn't care about that. She didn't care about the fund. All she cared about was getting away from me and doing her own thing. So I had to ask myself, what was the point of holding on to the college fund if she didn't even want my help? If she didn't want to be a part of my life, why should I be the one to make sure she had everything she needed for her future? I tried to put off making any decisions, but the longer I sat with it, the more it ate away at me. I couldn't stop thinking about how she'd said she was going no contact, how she planned to leave and not look back. It felt like a punch to the gut every time I remembered those words, and the more I thought about it, the angrier I got. I didn't want to be petty or spiteful, but I also didn't want to be a doormat. I mean, I had worked my ass off to give her everything, and now she was telling me I wasn't even going to be a part of her life anymore. It just didn't sit right with me. I couldn't shake the feeling that if she was serious about cutting me off, then I had no obligation to fund her future. Why should I? One evening, after another day of tense silence in the house, I decided it was time to talk to her again. I needed to lay it all out on the table, to be upfront with her about how I was feeling. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about respect. It was about her understanding that I wasn't just some ATM she could use and then discard when she didn't need me anymore. So I knocked on her door and asked if we could talk. She sighed, clearly not in the mood for another conversation, but she let me in. Look, I started, trying to keep my tone calm. I've been thinking a lot about what you said the other night, about wanting to live your own life, about not wanting me to be so involved. Ella didn't say anything, just stared at the floor, her arms crossed over her chest. I took that as my cue to keep going. I understand that you're ready to be independent, and I'm trying to respect that, I said. But I need you to understand where I'm coming from, too. I've worked hard to make sure you had a future without worrying about debt, without struggling like I did. And now you're telling me that you don't want me in your life anymore, that you're going no contact. She looked up at me then, her eyes narrowing. I didn't say it like that, Mom. I just need space. You're making it sound like I'm abandoning you. It felt like that, I admitted. It felt like you were saying you don't need me anymore. And that hurts, Ella. It really does. She stayed quiet, but at least she wasn't arguing with me. So I kept going. The thing is, if you don't want me to be a part of your life, if you're serious about needing space and going no contact after you leave for college, then I don't think I can keep the college fund for you anymore. Her face changed immediately. What do you mean? I mean, if you're planning to cut me out of your life, I'm not going to be the one funding it, I said, trying to stay firm but not too harsh. That money was meant for you to get a good education, but it was also meant to be part of our relationship. I saved that money because I love you and I wanted to give you a head start. But if you're going to cut me off, I'm not going to keep sacrificing for someone who doesn't want me around. Ella's jaw dropped a little. I could tell she wasn't expecting this. You're seriously going to take the money away just because I said I need space? It's not about space, I said. It's about the fact that you're telling me I won't be in your life anymore. If you want to be independent, then fine, be independent. But that means you can't rely on me to pay for everything and then walk away when it's convenient. She stood up then, clearly angry. So this is your way of punishing me for wanting freedom? You're taking the money back to control me just like I said. I shook my head. That's not what this is, Ella. I'm not trying to control you. I'm trying to protect myself. I've given everything for you, and now you're saying you don't want me in your life. I can't keep giving if I'm not going to be a part of your future. She was fuming. You're selfish. You're only doing this because I'm not living up to your expectations. I thought you were saving that money for me because you loved me. But I guess it was just a way to make sure I stayed under your thumb. I didn't even know how to respond to that. I had tried so hard to be understanding, to explain where I was coming from, but she wasn't hearing it. To her, this was all about control, and nothing I said was going to change her mind. I'm sorry you feel that way, I said quietly, but my decision is final. If you're serious about going no contact, then I'm taking the college fund back. I'll split it between Jake's education and my own needs. Ella stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. I stood there for a minute, trying to process everything that had just happened. It wasn't what I wanted. I didn't want to be at odds with my own daughter, but I had to stand up for myself. I had to draw the line somewhere. I didn't know what the future was going to look like between me and Ella. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was making the right decision for me. And maybe, just maybe, that was okay.